Hey everyone.
Hey everybody.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about another one of our favorite things about travel is the flexibility. We've talked about that in the past. Usually we're talking about this in the context of taking time off or, basically taking extended breaks between contracts, either to travel domestically or internationally for fun, spending time with family, those kind of things, maybe pursuing hobbies. But also it gives you the flexibility to decide whether or not you want to continue to travel continuously or if you want to stop and maybe take breaks, take PRN jobs. Some people will stop and take a perm job for a year or so. And when we first started traveling, we see a lot of other people that seem to think that you're either a traveler or you're not a traveler. And what we've found more and more over time for us and for a lot of other people that have traveled for a while that we interact with is it's more of you might decide to travel, now it makes sense for you, and then next year maybe you meet someone and you want to stay in an area for 6 months or 9 months or a year, maybe you take a perm job for a year and then you go back to travel. So very often people are kind of flowing in and out of the travel world, and it's not just you're a traveler or you're not a traveler. So Whitney's going to introduce us. I'm going to get this video shared in a few different groups.
All right, hey, for those that may not know us, my name is Whitney.
I'm Jared.
And we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We have been travel PTs for about 9 years now. It's been almost exactly 9 years since we graduated from our DPT programs and started traveling right away as new grads. It's definitely new grad time right now. I think our graduation back in 2015 was right around this time in May, and we've seen there's a lot of other new grads out there. So shout out to all the new grads that are finishing up your programs and considering getting started with your careers and what you're going to do. So as I mentioned, we've been travel PTs ever since we were new grads. So we've done it on and off now for 9 years. And that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about now is in this video is the flexibility of you don't always have to travel continuously to really be a traveler. We've done kind of a mix between taking travel contracts, taking time off for fun, and then also working PRN at home and staying home for a while as well. And we'll talk about lots of different scenarios tonight where that may make sense for you to take a break from traveling or return to traveling later. Lots of different options out there. That's the great part about being a healthcare provider is we do have so many career options. And also the great thing about being a healthcare provider, you're almost always in demand. So there's almost always going to be job opportunities for you, whether locally or travel or otherwise. So lots of options. So we'll dig into that here a little bit more. If anyone is watching live with us on Facebook, feel free to say hello in the comments. Let us know who you are. Are you a traveler? Are you someone who's thinking about traveling? Let us know your situation. Have you always been a traveler? Have you taken time off? I see Nick is on. Hi, Nick. Thanks for tuning in tonight.
You can always count on Nick to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate your support, Nick. Hey, Andrew. So yeah, if anybody else tunes in live, feel free to say hi in the comments, and then also shout out to those of you that will listen later on our podcast or on our YouTube channel. Real quick before we dive into tonight's topic, I did also want to mention that we are currently running a sale on our travel therapy course. The sale actually ends tonight, so if you want to take advantage of that sale, we have 50% off of our course right now. Our course is titled Becoming a Financially Successful Travel Therapist, and the reason we titled it this was we didn't want to just teach you only the basics of how to get started with travel therapy, but we really wanted to teach you how to use travel therapy to pursue financial independence and become a financially successful traveler, which is the main reason that we've used travel therapy, to become financially successful, to meet our financial goals, which also helped us to live a very flexible lifestyle and not work full-time anymore. So if you are interested in the course, it's on sale until tonight, Monday, May the 6th, and the code is SPRING 2024, all together, SPRING 2024, and that'll save you 50%. That's actually the biggest discount we've ever offered on the course, so take advantage of it while it lasts.
Yep. All right, so in terms of, a lot of people think you're either a traveler or you're not a traveler. We get questions all the time from new grads, especially, or students that are like, I'm trying to decide if I should travel or I'm trying to decide if I should take a permanent job, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think for a lot of people, maybe you should get some experience first. If you feel pretty good about your skills and stuff, okay, you can start traveling right away. But just because you decide to start as a traveler as a new grad does not mean that you're going to stay a traveler for 8-9 years like we have. Or just because you take a perm job for your first year out of school doesn't mean you're always going to stay at that perm job. There's a lot of flexibility in the therapy world, and there's a lot of demand for therapists, and that really gives us the opportunity, especially for travelers with a end date on their contract, to decide what you want to do. You might take a contract somewhere you've never heard of and you might really like it and you might want to stay in that area for a year or 6 months, and you might take a perm job or get a PRN job 30 hours a week or something. And then after that, you might decide you don't really want to stay there full time and maybe you want to travel again. And there's no issue with that. You stay in contact with recruiters, and they're used to people coming and going as well. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to travel with what you want to do with your work situation.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of it as just like either one or the other. Some people will start off with travel and then they're like, okay, I travel for a while and then I settle into a permanent job. Now I'm settling down. This is where I'll be forever and ever. Or vice versa. They've been in a perm job for a while. They want to start traveling for one reason or another. Maybe they're kind of burnt out or they're looking for new opportunities. And then they think, when I leave my perm job and I go travel, then that's just it. That's the transition. But we more and more over the years know a lot of people that go back and forth and do a variety of different things. So we just want to show you what types of things could be available to you if you really open your mind to it. So what are some reasons why you might transition back and forth? There's a lot of different things.
One thing is we often encourage people to try to keep a PRN job back home, and a variety of reasons for that. One, you might decide that you don't want to take a contract right after the next one. You might want to go home for a while, and it might be good to have a job where you can at least work a day or two a week and make some money while you're there. It also helps with your tax home situation to have a job back home. So part of solidifying your tax home, and you don't have to have a job back home, but it definitely makes it look, bulletproof. Obviously, if you have a job back home that you're going to sometimes, then it looks really good. And over the years, we've had PRN jobs back home that we return to and work every now and then. And that can be a great reason to, take some time off, work PRN, maybe you have some family obligations, maybe you have a bunch of weddings coming up and you go back and work PRN at home, and then you're going to go back to travel after, say, the summer's over and the weddings are over. We see that very often for a lot of people.
Yeah, and so as part of the tax home rules, you do need to spend at least 30 days at home every year. And so for some people, they just do like maybe a week here and there or 2 weeks twice a year. And maybe that's time that you're not working. Maybe it's just 2 weeks around the holidays and 2 weeks in the summer, and you're not working during that time, and that works for you. But for some people, maybe you want to do a whole 30-day stretch all at once, and you can't really afford or would prefer not to be completely off from work at that time. So maybe it suits you well to have that PRN job at home to earn some income during your tax home obligations to be home. In other cases, there are some people that need to spend that 30 days at home, and they may even take more of like a short-term local contract. If you're able to arrange that, you can arrange it kind of like a travel contract for some of those same reasons, to spend a little time at home, be near family for a certain season of life. You may be able to arrange an actual 2 or 3 month travel contract. It's just the difference there is if you're staying at your house, your pay would be all taxed instead of getting the tax-free stipends.
Yeah, a lot of times it makes sense to go back home and work PRN for a while for people that, say you're from Virginia, like we are, and you're taking most of your contracts in California. Well, it's not really convenient to go back and forth from Virginia to California to maintain your tax home. So maybe for a month every year, you come back home, work PRN, and then you can maintain your tax home that way.
And the other reason might be for returning home to do some PRN work or take a job for a little while. Some people just get a little bit burnt out from traveling, which is, not necessarily burnout for the same reasons, maybe not clinically, but maybe they just get a little bit wary of traveling and all the transitions and the moving around. So every now and then some people just feel like they need a break and they need some stability, and it feels good to go home for a couple of months. Doesn't mean they're going to stop traveling, just maybe they need a couple months at home, and that would be a good reason to pick up a part-time job or a temporary at-home contract.
Another big reason we see with people that decide to stop traveling for a little bit is they take a contract in a place and they meet a coworker or someone there that they want to stay around, a significant other or a boyfriend, girlfriend, that they want to see how the relationship works out. They don't want to just leave after 3 months. And often in that situation, people will choose to stay on at that clinic PRN, or they'll find something else PRN around there and, stay for 6 months or 9 months and see how things progress, if that's somebody you really want to be around or if you just want to move on to the next contract. So very often people will meet someone, stay for a little while longer. Maybe you can't stay at that contract, but you can take a PRN job temporarily in that area and then move on afterwards.
Yeah, and it just kind of depends on the situation. We've known people that happened to, where they met somebody and they were able to extend their travel therapy contract. That's a great situation. If you want to be there longer, they need you longer, and you can extend for up to a year. But like Jared said, if for some reason you can't extend that contract, you could either look into taking another contract to be in that area for a little longer, or look into taking a PRN or a local job sort of temporarily. You're not necessarily committing to moving there full time, but you want to see where this relationship goes and then decide, is it going to be something that you two are going to work out? Maybe after being there for 6 months or a year, maybe you decide, yes, I am going to move here permanently. Or maybe your partner decides they're going to come with you to travel. Or maybe you all decide together to move somewhere for you to settle down permanently. But it still gives you the option to kind of be transient in that situation. You're not necessarily committing to a permanent job long term there, but you might find one reason or another to stay longer.
Yeah. Another reason we see sometimes people will take a break from traveling is they want to get clinical experience in a setting that they don't have experience in. And that might sound crazy to you because you're like, oh, well, the reason I want to travel is so I can work in different settings. Well, there's some settings, like acute care is a good example, where they want you to have some experience for a lot of these travel contracts. There are some small hospitals that are willing to train. It's not a big deal if you don't have experience, but if you go to like a level 1 trauma center, they don't want to hire a person that's worked as an outpatient therapist for 6 years to come in there and try to work as a hospital PT. They know that they're putting you in a bad situation, and they don't want to put people in that situation. So some people will take time off and say work in a hospital for a year to get that experience, so that then they can go back to travel and find those hospital jobs that they want to take. This can also be the case for home health sometimes. Home health agencies, sometimes they're willing to hire and train someone that doesn't have experience, but sometimes they want experience. And in that case, it could be a good idea to take 6 months or a year off of traveling, work a full-time home health job, get some experience there, so that then you can come back into travel and take those home health travel jobs that pay really well.
Yeah, and as Jared mentioned, there are some travel contracts where they will be willing to take you on without experience and train you. It just really depends on the location. Actually, one of our friends, Morgan, who's an occupational therapist, she wrote an article about this topic of transitioning between PRN and Perm, or PRN and travel jobs. We're going to be publishing her guest post later this week, so keep an eye out for that. And that's a big reason that she actually decided to take a break from travel, to take a PRN job for I think she was there for about 2 years. As an occupational therapist, she was having trouble finding travel therapy contracts that would take her in acute care without experience. And so an opportunity arose for her to take a PRN job that was like a pretty full-time hour PRN job, more like 30 to 40 hour PRN job, permanently, kind of like for a year or so. She kind of committed like, yeah, I'll stay here for about a year. And they were willing to train her because they're investing more time in you. Whereas sometimes with travel therapy contracts, especially if they're only 3 months, they may not want to invest that time and money in you to train you if you're only going to be there 3 months. So she found this opportunity. She said, I'm going to be there for a year or so, ended up staying 2 years. And they trained her. She got all this experience in acute care, inpatient rehab, and a couple of other like hospital related settings. And then she left there after 2 years to return to travel now with this new experience on her resume. And now she's having a lot easier time getting into these acute care contracts that she wanted.
Yeah, that's very common. I mean, it's good to be able to get that experience, and then it opens up your horizon in terms of what travel contracts you're able to take too. That's especially the case for OTAs and PTAs. It's very common that some settings want experience for assistance. And so if you can go work a perm job for a little bit, maybe you're opened up to more settings, and there's already limited jobs, especially for like a quota. So you want to have as many job options available to you as you can. Mm-hmm. So that would be a reason that you might take time off.
Yeah, and this really goes back to if you guys have watched any of our videos or listened to our podcasts in the past about the job market. It really goes back to supply and demand. So I would say that Morgan, being an occupational therapist, OTs don't have quite as strong of a job market as PTs. And so it might have been a little bit different for Morgan had she been a PT. Not necessarily, it doesn't always mean that's going to be the case, but with the PT job market being a lot stronger, there's a lot more cases where they're willing to take you on and train because they're really desperate for a PT, or they're willing to just commit to you even though you don't have the experience. Whereas the disciplines like OTA, PTA, and OT, where the job market is not quite as robust, it's a little bit more competitive. They may have a little more trouble getting their foot in the door for these competitive settings. So again, that kind of goes back to just supply and demand and knowing your job market.
Another reason you might want to transition from travel into PRN for a little while is maybe you have something you're very specific travel contract you're looking for. So maybe you only want a job in Anchorage, Alaska, and there's nothing available right now. And maybe you go back home during that gap when you're waiting for something to pop up, and you work PRN at home during that time. And then when the perfect job pops up, you're able to jump on it. But you're not just sitting around making no money during that time. And we've been in that situation before where we're like, we want something very specific, and we're willing to wait as long as we want as long as we need to take that job. And in the meantime, we'll just work PRN and it's not a big deal. And usually the longer you travel, the more flexibility you have, because the more money you're able to save up. And then you're able to take longer periods off, work PRN, instead of just taking travel contracts, so that you can find the perfect situation for you. And this could also be the case for people that are taking school contracts. So say you're working a school year and the school year ends in May, June, and then you have 3 months that you don't have work. That's a perfect time to go home, work PRN for a while, and then have another travel contract when the next school year starts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example there. We also do know some school therapists that will pick up a short-term travel contract in that intermediate time, especially like if they like working with peds and they can find like an outpatient pediatric summer contract. But sometimes it has to be a little shorter because your gap may not be exactly 13 weeks. So sometimes you can negotiate that. Or if you're flexible to work in another setting, like maybe do an adult setting for the summer for 2-3 months, take a travel contract before going back for your school year. But if you can't find a travel contract that works for your specific dates, then a PRN job may be a good option for you there.
One last reason that we know several therapists that have done this in the past. They take a travel contract at a place, they extend for 9 months, a year, and then they can no longer extend, but they love the place. They really like the clinic. The patients are great, the schedule's perfect, and they get a really good offer for pay. And they decide, okay, maybe I do want to stay here. I don't want to be here forever. I don't love this area, but it would be great to stay here for another year, make the money, and have this great patient population. I don't have to worry about the uncertainty of travel, whether I'm going to be going to great clinics or not. I already know this one's going to be good and they're going to pay me well. So sometimes travelers will get an offer they can't refuse in terms of pay and work situation, and they'll choose to stay there for like a year and then leave after that and go back to travel again.
Yeah, we would call this kind of like a temporary permanent job. So you're saying, we have some friends that's like, maybe you love Alaska at this stage of your life. And you're like, yeah, I could see spending another year or maybe even 2 years in Alaska, but long term, I don't think I'm going to live in Alaska forever. Maybe you are, but I'm just saying in this specific example, maybe that's like long term, that you do want to be back closer to family, but for a year or two, sure. So after your time is up for your travel contract, you may decide to commit to, somewhat of a perm job, but with the understanding that like, it's not going to be forever. I mean, honestly, these days, no one who takes a perm job is it forever. We hardly know anyone that stays at a job longer than 2 to 5 years. Even just regular jobs at their permanent location where they plan to live. People turn over jobs a lot more quickly these days, so I think it's perfectly reasonable if you find a place you really like and you're like, yeah, I'll stay here for a year and sign on as a permanent employee for a little bit, but let them know like, it's probably not gonna be my long-term goal, or you may not even have to let them know. You may not even have to say that. You may just say, yeah, I'll take the job, and then when it doesn't suit you anymore in a year or two, move on and either return to travel or go back to wherever you plan to settle down permanently.
It might be that we see that more often because it seems like the outpatient PT world is very transient. There's people just constantly switching clinics, and it seems rare for someone to stay as a clinic or a treating clinician at one outpatient clinic for more than a couple years. Maybe other settings aren't like that, but yes, it seems like people are switching more often, and I mean there's reason to, because a lot of times when people switch jobs, they end up making more money on the next job. You're able to negotiate higher wages. So there's a lot of situations where it makes sense to switch from job to job to try to make more money.
Yeah, so just know that if you find yourself in that situation, it's not a bad idea if it works for you for a year or so and you think, yeah, I'll take this permanent job. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily moving to that location forever. You can just do what works well for you for that year or that 2-year period. And then you could always jump back into travel. We know a lot of people that have done that before, so you would not be the first. Or you can just move straight from that job back home and settle down permanently.
Yeah.
Quick shout out to those of you that are watching live. Hi Andrew, hi Joey, hi Raul, hi Claudia, hey Christy, hey Nicole. If anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments if you are watching live. Also, if you're watching on Facebook, we'd love if you'd hit the thumbs up button. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love if you'd like the video and subscribe if you're listening on the podcast as well.
So another thing we want to talk about now is logistics for doing this sort of thing, going from travel to PRN, perm jobs, switching in and out. One thing that you have to think about is the pay differences. And obviously most people now, I would say, 60 or 70% of people that get into travel, they do it because they know they're going to make more money. And so obviously if you're going from taking travel jobs to working a PRN job or a full-time permanent job in an area, you're probably going to take a pay cut when you do that. So that needs to be a consideration. If you're thinking, okay, I really want to stay in this area, but I would really like to make money as a traveler, you have to choose one or the other. There are people that will break the rules and they'll stay as a traveler in an area for 3, 4, 5 years at a time. But you have to remember that is very risky to do. So you either need to choose to continue traveling, or if you want to stay in this area that you took a travel contract, you really like that area and you want to stay, then you need to look into transitioning into PRN or permanent jobs and understand that a pay cut comes along with that and plan for it.
Yeah, but a lot of times, depending on, like, say if it's the situation where you've taken a travel contract somewhere and they really want you to stay permanent, and you're like, okay, I'll stay here for another year and work for you directly as a permanent employee, right? You can use this as a negotiating tactic, because you can let them know, like, hey, if I do this, I'm giving up this travel pay, and you know how much you're paying me at travel pay. This is what I make after taxes. Well, now they can't pay you as travel pay where you're getting the tax-free stipends anymore, but you could try to get them to raise the salary amount to where it would be somewhat close to what you're making, or at least make it worth your while, by making a higher offer than what they usually pay perm, or maybe somehow offset it with your benefits package. So definitely negotiate in those situations when you know that they really need you and they really want you, and that maybe their alternative is to continue hiring travelers where they're having to pay even more. So have them try to meet you in the middle somewhere.
And we've heard of situations where someone, basically, they get a job offer, they would like to stay, and they just tell the manager, hey, this is what I'm making. If you can't pay me that, then I'm going to leave. And there are some clinics that are desperate enough. They don't want to have travelers over and over and over. If they can get some stability for a year or two, we've heard of people paying them basically what they were making as a traveler to stay permanent there for a year or two. So it sounds crazy. You would never make that as just a regular perm therapist, but if the clinic is desperate enough and they really need you there, then sometimes they're willing to pay that much for you to be there as a permanent therapist.
Yeah, but again, it's a case-by-case basis. It depends on the negotiating power and how desperate and all that. Same thing goes for if you're looking for a PRN job for any of these other situations. Try to compare notes. If you know anyone else that has taken PRN jobs in the area, always try to shoot high. It doesn't hurt to just say, I want to make $60 an hour or whatever it might be, $70 an hour. And I mean, they could say this is what we normally pay, but always try to one up them, try to get that higher if you can. But realize that in most circumstances for these PRN or permanent jobs, or somewhat permanent jobs, it's gonna be all taxed. You're not gonna get that tax-free money. So that's gonna affect your bottom line, and that's gonna affect how much you're paying taxes, obviously. So yeah, keep that in mind, but definitely try to negotiate and get as high of a rate as you can.
Something else you need to think about is if you are going to go from travel to a perm job, sometimes the perm jobs will ask you to sign a contract, or maybe there'll be a sign-on bonus if you stay for 2 years or whatever. Look at the details of that contract. Make sure that's something you're actually going to commit to, and hopefully if it's a place that you took a travel job there, you know what it's going to be like, and so you have some insight into the clinic and you know you're going to like it. But just make sure before you sign one of these contracts for a year or 2 years that it's a clinic that you're going to want to be at, that the patient population is good, that the managers aren't overbearing, that the productivity is reasonable before you sign those contracts, because signing those long perm contracts, sometimes they can be hard to get out of. You can always get out of things, but you might miss out on some sort of bonus or something like that.
Yeah. When it comes to PRN, there's typically not going to be a contract or a time commitment. Now, some PRN jobs, it depends on how much you want to disclose. They might say, like, well, do you live here permanently, or like, how long are you going to be in the area? You said you were a traveler. I see on your resume you were a traveler. So some of them might ask questions like that. And, you may or may not want to disclose, I'm only going to be here for 2 months because I'm staying to see family or whatever, and then I'm leaving. Or you may want to be transparent. Just kind of feel it out depending on what works for you. You may want to tell them if it's home that you're looking at a PRN job. You may want to be transparent about your lifestyle. Like, I go and take travel contracts, I come back sometimes, because it might be a PRN job that you want to return to. So then you need to have that discussion and know, like, is it going to be available when I come back? Some of them will say, yes, we'll just leave you on long term, but there are some PRN jobs, depending on the setting, where they have a requirement that you work a certain number of shifts in a certain period of time. For example, I had a PRN job where you had to work at least one shift every 60 days. And so when we took our contracts that we're on right now, I was going to be gone for 3 months. I basically had to terminate my employment with them because I wasn't going to be able to work my obligation of once every 60 days. So find out about what are their rules and, like, what are the terms that you're agreeing to before you sign on. But not all facilities are the same. Some facilities, like we had a PRN job at an outpatient clinic for a while that just let us stay on for 2 or 3 years, and we would just pop in every 6 months here and there.
Yeah, all those situations are different. We get questions sometimes like, oh, how do you find PRN jobs on contract, or how do you find PRN jobs back home? And it really is a case-by-case basis. There's no secret to it. You just have to put your application out there and talk to the manager and see if what you need fits what they need. And
Exactly.
If you do it enough, you talk to enough people, you're going to find someone that's like, oh yeah, okay, maybe you're gone for 3 months and then you're back for a few days, and maybe we'll need you, maybe we don't. And those types of situations are what you need, something flexible.
And it just depends too, like the whole thing about like how do you find them? Well, it could be a situation where you already are familiar with a facility because you worked there before, or you had a friend that worked there before, or you know the manager, or you know the regional manager, or whatever it might be. Maybe it's great if you have an in where you can just have a conversation with the manager before formally filling out the application. Or maybe not. Maybe it's that you just see it on Indeed or you see it on their website and you just fill out the application and go that route. Or maybe it's that you are aware that there is a facility in the area and you call them directly or go in person and ask them, like, even if they don't have a listing, sometimes they might have you work there. Like that happened with my one PRN job. There was no listing. It's just that I knew somebody who had worked there before, so he got me in contact with the manager and I said, I see you guys have a listing for a permanent therapist, but would you have any need for PRN? He was like, yeah, I mean, we could use PRN. So he created a listing for me. So you just have to ask, and it depends on the situation.
Something else you need to think about if you decide, especially if you decide to work PRN, like you stay in an area or you go back home and work PRN, is what you're going to do about insurance, because most travelers take their insurance through the travel company, their health insurance. So most PRN jobs will not give you health insurance unless you work a certain number of hours, and in a lot of cases you won't be working enough hours to get benefits. So for a lot of people that means maybe something like taking a marketplace plan or going through a third-party insurer during that time. But you have to figure out some other way to get health insurance if you're going to work PRN and you're going to be leaving travel for a while. There are some travelers like us that already have policies outside of their travel company, in which case it's not a big deal. You can switch in and out, no big deal. But if you're relying on your travel company for health insurance, just realize that when you leave, you need to figure out some other option.
Yeah, and if health insurance is a really big deal for you and you don't really see a great alternative to be able to do like your own private insurance, then it may make more sense for you to, in these situations, not do a PRN job, but do more of like a temporary permanent job where you actually sign on with them. Hopefully it's not, if you can't do the long-term commitment, there are some facilities that'll let you sign on as just a regular employee with kind of an indefinite end date. There's no like contract commitment, but then if you sign on for 40 hours a week, then they could give you benefits. So always ask about those things, and it's definitely something to take into consideration. But I would say that for most people, if you're planning on having this flexible back and forth between travel, PRN, take breaks, it is just easier to have your own insurance for most people.
One thing that can derail you, though, if you decide to do this sort of thing, where you're going from travel to PRN, perm jobs, whatever, is you have to think about, if you're going to go back to travel, your tax home situation. Because in addition to like going back home and working, or being back home 30 days a year, if you work for a full year and you're earning income for a full year in the same area, then that new area becomes your tax home. That might not seem like a big deal while you're working PRN. Say you take a travel contract there, you work 6 months, and then you work PRN for 9 months. So you've been there over a year. Well, when you go back to travel, now you have to figure out what you're going to do for your new tax home, because now that area is your tax home. So are you going to rent a room in that area? Are you going to keep your apartment or whatever you have in that area, and you're going to travel now away from this new area? Or are you going to try to reestablish your tax home back wherever it was before, which is a little more of a cumbersome process. Mm-hmm. So be wary of that. If you're staying in the same area for more than a year earning income, that area becomes your tax home. So there are situations where that's not a big deal, but there are situations where it is a big deal, and you just want to be aware.
That can be really tricky. A lot of people are like, well, how did it become my tax home? I didn't change my permanent address. I didn't get a driver's license there. My other tax home is still my tax home. But keep in mind, tax homes, this whole concept is an IRS rule. And what the IRS ultimately cares about is the place in which you earned the most income. Yes, they do have these other rules and other things that help determine like what is your tax home, but the bottom line is they care about where you earned the most income. So if you're going to stay for more than a year in an area, first of all, you can't stay for more than a year while accepting tax-free stipends. Second of all, if you stay for more than a year, like Jared said, and take like a temporary permanent type job there, now in the eyes of the IRS, it is the tax home. So this is the situation where we really recommend you talk to a tax consultant if you decide to hop back into travel therapy. Quite often what we have heard from the tax advisors that we've talked to, they recommend in that situation go back to your actual tax home that you want to reestablish as your tax home for a little while and work there for 3 or 6 months, whether taking a local contract that's all taxed or taking a PRN job back home for a little while to kind of reestablish that situation before jumping back into travel. But again, highly recommend just paying a tax advisor, set up a consult to make sure that you have all that squared away.
Yeah, it's well worth it to do those consults because there's a lot of weird intricacies in terms of tax law. So we talk all the time about tax homes and the requirements, but like Whitney said, the most important thing is where you earn the majority of your income. And this can also apply to a situation we've seen before. We've talked to accountants that said, that advised us on this. Let's say you work in an area and you keep going back there every year and you stay there for 9 months a year. So say you take school contracts and you're doing a school contract in the area, you're going back home for 3 months, contract in the area, back home for 3 months. Some people think, oh, well, I took that 3 months off, it's not a big deal. Well, there's 2 reasons why you can't do that. One is you can't be in the same area for more than a year in any 24-month period. But the other reason is if you're earning the majority of your income in the same area year after year after year, that's your new tax home. Wherever you're earning the majority of your income is your tax home. So that doesn't matter if you're duplicating expenses or you're going back home or you have your driver's license back in this other area. If you're earning most of your income for multiple years in the same area, then that is your tax home. So there's a lot of intricacies with that, and talking to a tax advisor is always a good idea.
And we can't stress enough that you can't just trust your recruiter or your boss or your coworkers when it comes to these things, because you will talk to other people who are like, no, I've done this is fine. The bottom line is if you get audited by the IRS, you're the one who has to answer for it, not your recruiter, not your boss, not your coworker. So if you want to make sure that you're doing everything correctly in case of an audit, then you need to talk to a tax advisor.
The audit risk is low, but I mean, how terrible would it be to be in that situation, being audited and having to try to explain yourself for something that you didn't know about?
Yeah. So a couple more things I just want to talk about with logistics, because we do get a lot of questions where people don't understand PRN jobs and those types of things. First of all, you might hear it called different things depending on who you talk to. We typically have heard it called PRN, which if you've ever looked at medical terminology means as needed. You can take a medication, PRN, or you can be employed on a PRN basis. Other places will call it on a per diem basis. Other places will call it, what's the other thing they call it? They call it like flexible or like flex time, or there's one I've heard where they call it casual. You're a casual employee, but for the most part we call it PRN, so it just means as needed. So what this boils down to is depending on the facility and their needs, they may not need you for very many hours. So this goes back to when you're trying to negotiate some type of employment with this employer, you want to ask like, how many hours would you typically need me? There are some places that are very understaffed, and so they may employ you PRN, meaning that it's going to be a little bit flexible. They don't have to commit to a certain number of hours, but they can probably tell you one way or the other. They might say, we're really short-staffed. I guarantee that we'll probably need you 30 or 40 hours if you're willing to work that much. And it may just depend on you and what your goals are for that time frame. Maybe you're home for a little while and financially you do need to work full-time hours, and you're like, yes, I need to work at least 30 or 40 hours. Can you somewhat guarantee me that I'm going to get that many? Or maybe you're in a situation like us where we prefer to work part-time and we have a lot of savings and investments already from our travel therapy careers. And so when we do PRN, we actually only want to work very, very part-time. And so we usually tell our employers like, oh, I can only do 2 days a week. I will not work more than that. So it depends on your needs and what suits you at that phase of life. But when you sign up for PRN jobs, they're not all the same. There's some PRN jobs that I've had where they don't call me, like they might ask me like to come in like once a month. And I'm like, okay, well, if I was relying on this income, this wouldn't be the right job for me. So in some cases, we've known people that strung together more than one PRN job in order to get enough hours. So you need to always have that conversation and ask them what their staffing needs are. We've known quite a few people that had PRN jobs where they basically gave them a schedule. They were like, yeah, we'll take you Monday through Thursday, this time to this time. And maybe they might call you off early every now and then, because that's what it means for them to have a PRN person, is that you're the one that, if the caseload is low, they call you off instead of their permanent staff. So there's always some risk there, but usually they can give you a ballpark of like how many hours you might work.
That's a good point. We've seen so many different types of PRN jobs. There's no one size fits all there either. It just really just have to see what their needs are and what you need and try to work something out there, because yeah, I mean, I've worked PRN jobs where I'm working 40 hours. I've worked PRN jobs where I'm working 1 day every 2 months, and everything in between.
Yeah, so you really need to make your needs known and have this discussion. The other thing is, it depends on the type of facility. We've found that like skilled nursing facilities are usually pretty flexible because the caseload varies. They might need you sometimes on a Saturday or a Monday or a Friday, or they may need you all week. Outpatient types of PRN jobs, typically they need to know in advance because they have to schedule patients with you. Hospitals are usually the most strict. We've heard of some hospitals, when you sign on PRN, that they actually want you to go through a full orientation that could take a week or a month. And so hospitals sometimes, I would say, are probably the least flexible when it comes to getting signed on PRN with them. So you definitely need to ask the hiring manager, what does that look like? Is my situation going to match your situation? I would also say that home health tends to be pretty flexible, because home health, you may not even need any kind of full caseload. You can even just pick up a visit here and there. They might just say, yeah, can you do 1 visit or 5 visits or whatever that may be. So home health is usually pretty flexible when it comes to hours.
Yep. All right. If you guys have any questions, we've got one more point here. But if you have any questions or comments, leave those now. We'll get them at the end.
The last thing to consider is in terms of the benefits. We talked a little bit about health insurance as far as benefits go, but there are other benefits that people want to know about, like liability insurance. So if you choose to have a flexible schedule like this, where sometimes you're doing PRN and sometimes you're doing part-time and so forth and so on, it may be a good idea for you to just carry your own liability insurance year-round. That's a very cheap insurance to get. We get that question sometimes.
Like $100 or $200 a year, it's really pretty affordable.
Yeah, so just to make sure you have that extra coverage, although in most cases your employer does cover you, but just in case if you're kind of going back and forth between jobs. People also will ask us about like, well, what about 401k and these types of things? Again, it depends on your financial goals and your investment strategies, but we recommend that you have some of your own investment vehicles. Maybe that's an IRA, maybe you have a brokerage account, so that during those periods of time when you're not eligible to contribute to an employer-sponsored 401k, then you have other options for your investments. Any other benefits outside of insurance and 401k that you would need to consider? So yeah, some of those things you just want to look into it and realize that quite often if you choose to take a PRN job, you're not going to be eligible for any benefits. Although I have had some PRN jobs where I was eligible for 401k, so you just have to ask. Alrighty, so I think that's all the key points that we wanted to go over. Again, if there's any questions that anybody has, feel free to leave them in the comments and we'll go over them. Again, if you learned anything from this video, we'd love if you'd hit that thumbs up button. If there's no questions live, then we'll also always take questions later if you want to send us a message or comment on the video at a later time when you watch it.
Yeah, the take-home message here is that travel is not a permanent thing. No one's going to travel forever anyway. And there's different seasons of your life where it might make sense for you to settle down in an area for a little bit, and that doesn't make you not a traveler anymore just because you take a perm job for a year and then you go back to it. People do that all the time. There's always people going in and out.
Nick says, or you can invest in a rental like me where the tenant breaks the deck steps. Oh no, Nick. Yeah, a lot of our friends that are in travel healthcare also end up getting into some kind of real estate investing or something, so that I think ultimately a lot of travelers have the goal, once they realize the flexibility that comes with travel, it opens up other avenues for you to start investing in things, dabbling in different things, maybe coming up with a side hustle, a side business, and ultimately getting to this goal where none of us want to work full time, right? Like we want to have more freedom with our time, and that's why we make money anyway, right? Is to be able to enjoy our lives, enjoy our hobbies, enjoy our travels, enjoy our families. So travel can open up so many opportunities for you, both financially and lifestyle wise.
it also gives you the time and the funds to be able to pursue some of those side hustle type things or investment type things.
Yep. So, I mean, if you can't tell, we're huge proponents of travel therapy. It has honestly changed our lives. Like, we used to think inside the box that we were kind of taught with our careers as physical therapists. We thought, okay, if we want to do this travel therapy thing, we'll work full-time, 40 hours a week, back to back to back weeks to make enough money. And then once we get done with traveling, we'll settle down and then take a permanent job where we also work 40-hour weeks, and we work and we work and we work. And then over time, we started being like, wait a minute, maybe if we invest enough, save enough, earn enough, that we could get to a point where we don't have to work full time. And now we've learned over the years that like that can look like a lot of different things. And for us, that has looked like sometimes taking a travel contract, sometimes going home and working PRN, sometimes not working at all. And now we even take part-time contracts, which isn't really common. But we've talked about that on a couple of videos where we have a lot of negotiating power now. And so we have been able to negotiate some part-time travel contracts, and that suits us. And if it suits them, why not?
Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Let us know if you have any video ideas or any questions about anything that we've talked about.
All right. Hope you guys have a great night, and thanks for joining.
Yep. Take care.